"You're lucky I married you," he said, with all the scorn a billionaire could muster for a woman he believed was nothing. He had no idea that the marriage contract Shed signed wasn't a life sentence, but a weapon. A secret document that secretly gave her complete control over every single penny of his vast fortune. This isn't just another rich man, poor woman story. It's a tale of a deeply guarded secret, a soul-crushing humiliation, and a plot twist so shocking it'll make you question everything you think you know about power and love. Have you ever felt underestimated, like no one could see what you were truly made of? Well, this one's for you. We're about to dive into the journey of Ruth Ortiz, the quiet wife, and Bruce Joseph, the magnate who thought he ruled the world. He thought he'd bought himself a bride, but what he'd actually done was sign away his entire empire. The question isn't if she'll use her secret power, but when. Brace yourself for an emotional roller coaster of drama, revenge, and maybe, just maybe, a shot at redemption. Their story is living proof that true power doesn't always need to shout sometimes. It just waits patiently for the perfect moment to make its move. It's a story of destiny. If you're ready for a life-changing story that will keep you on the edge of your seat, comment "plot twist" below right now. Hit that like button as a sign of respect for Ruth's quiet strength, and subscribe so you don't miss a single second of this unbelievable romance, where the underdog finally gets to call the shots. "You're lucky I married you," the words dripped from Bruce Joseph's lips, coated in the casual cruelty that only a true billionaire could afford. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, the city lights of his penthouse suite reflecting in his cold eyes. To him, this was just another Tuesday, another statement of fact to the quiet woman who wore his name. He saw her as an accessory, a pretty but silent fixture in his life of immense fortune and power, a necessary step in a grander plan. What a fool he was, honestly. He had absolutely no idea, not a single clue, that the very foundation of their married life was a lie of his own making. The marriage contract had his lawyer's draft, the one head so carelessly pushed in front of her, was not what he thought it was. It was her masterpiece, a Trojan horse sitting in plain sight. This document, this simple stack of papers, held a secret power so immense it could shatter his world with a single signature from Ruth Ortiz. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, her silhouette framed against the sprawling metropolis below. She didn't flinch, didn't offer a retort. Her stillness was her shield, her silence a vault containing the most shocking secret in the corporate world. While he boasted about his fortune, she knew the truth according to the fine print had never bothered to read. She had complete and total control over all of it. Every stock, every property, every dollar. It was all hers. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. He, Bruce Joseph, the self-proclaimed king, saw this marriage as his gift to her, a golden ticket out of her simple life. He genuinely believed he had elevated her, blessed her with a life she could only dream of. This rich man, poor woman narrative was the story he told himself every single night. A bedtime story for a lonely tycoon who confused possession with partnership. This contract wasn't just a legal document, it was a ticking time bomb. It represented a plot twist of epic proportions, waiting for the right moment to detonate. Every condescending word, every dismissive glance from him was just another tick of the clock. This wasn't just a marriage, it was a long game. A high-stakes drama where the stakes were an entire billionaire empire. And only one person truly knew the rules of the game. For now, she would play her part. She would be the quiet, unassuming wife, a ghost in his gilded cage. But a storm was gathering behind her gentle eyes. Their love story, if you could even call it that, was built on a monumental deception. And sooner or later, the truth would come out. He thought this was his world, but he was just living in it. She was the one who owned it. Bruce Joseph's world was one of cold, hard surfaces and even colder transactions. Glass towers scraped the sky. Boardrooms buzzed with ruthless ambition. and every human interaction was a negotiation. He was the CEO of a global empire, a man who saw life as a series of calculated moves on a chessboard. Emotions were liabilities, attachments were weaknesses, and love was a fairy tale for people who couldn't afford reality. His reality was one of unimaginable fortune and isolating power. His marriage to Ruth Ortiz was, in his mind, the ultimate business move. It was a strategic alliance, a way to secure his legacy and present the illusion of a stable, traditional life to his conservative board of directors. He needed an heir, and for that, he needed a wife. Ruth, with her quiet grace and simple background, seemed like the perfect candidate, and complete, unassuming, and he thought, controllable. She was a beautiful breathing contract, nothing more. Their home wasn't a home, it was a showroom. A sprawling, sterile mansion filled with art he never looked at and rooms they never entered. It was a monument to his success, a testament to his wealth, but it was devoid of warmth, of life, of connection. This was the gilded cage he had built, and he had willingly locked Ruth inside it with him. He failed to see the irony that he, too, was a prisoner of his own making, trapped by the very fortune he worshipped. He saw their marriage as a clear-cut deal in a classic rich man, poor woman scenario. He provided financial security beyond her wildest dreams, and in return, she provided him with the image he required. It was clean, it was simple, it was devoid of the messy complications of a real romance. He never once considered what she might want, what she might feel. Her inner world was a territory he had no interest in exploring, a footnote in their life-changing agreement. The contract between them was more than just a prenuptial agreement, it was the constitution of their entire relationship. It dictated the terms of their public appearances, their living arrangements, their entire existence as a married couple. But while he saw it as a tool to control her, he remained blissfully unaware of its true nature. The secret power embedded within its clauses remained dormant, a silent testament to his own arrogance and lack of scrutiny. And so, he continued to navigate his world of corporate power, treating his wife as just another asset in his portfolio. He had no idea that this quiet woman, who moved through his luxurious world like a shadow, was playing a completely different game. Their so-called love story was a masterclass in deception, and the biggest drama was yet to unfold, all because he saw a pawn where he should have seen a queen. The lavish parties were the worst. They were Bruce's natural habitat, a glittering jungle where predators in tuxedos and jewels circled each other, smelling for weakness. For Ruth, they were a special kind of hell. Here, surrounded by the city's elite, his so-called friends, her status as an outsider was thrown into sharp relief. They would look right through her, their eyes scanning for someone more important, their smiles never quite reaching their eyes. It was a masterclass in social cruelty. Bruce's friends, a flock of pampered socialites and arrogant heirs, openly mocked her humble origins. Their whispers followed her like a chill wind did. "You hear she was a waitress? I can't believe Bruce married her." The words were designed to cut, to remind her that she didn't belong. She was a novelty, a temporary curiosity in their world of old money and inherited power. They made it painfully clear that in this rich man, poor woman narrative, she was the charity case. And Bruce? He did nothing. He would stand just a few feet away, nursing a drink, a silent king observing the games in his court. He heard the whispers, saw the condescending smirks, but he never stepped in, never defended her. To him, this was a test. If she was to be his wife, she needed to develop a thicker skin. His silence wasn't just negligence, it was a reinforcement of her humiliation. He was co-signing their judgment, confirming that, yes, she was beneath them. She was humiliated, and he was the one holding the door open for her tormentors. Each party was a fresh wave of emotional torment. She would retreat into herself, a ghost at the feast, clutching a glass of water like a shield. She watched him command the room, his laughter booming, completely oblivious or perhaps indifferento her silent suffering. This marriage felt less like a partnership and more like a public shaming. The stunning gowns and borrowed diamonds felt like a costume, a cheap disguise that couldn't hide the simple truth. She was utterly and completely alone in his world. What a drama it was, all playing out under the glittering chandeliers. The sheer emotional disconnect was shocking. He genuinely couldn't understand why she wasn't grateful for the opportunity to be snubbed by the best people. This was his world, and his refusal to protect her in it was the deepest cut of all. It confirmed that their marriage contract was just business. There was no room for loyalty or protection when it came to matters of the heart, because, for him, there was no heart involved. But as she stood there, taking the verbal blows, a quiet resolve hardened within her. They saw weakness, but what was really growing was a strength they couldn't possibly comprehend. They were mocking the one person who held all their futures in the palm of her hand. Every insult was a deposit into a bank of future revenge, a debt that would one day be collected. Her destiny was not to be their doormat. A surprise was brewing. The setting was a crucial investor dinner, an intimate gathering of sharks in a private, wood-paneled room. The air was thick with tension and the smell of old money. Bruce was on edge. He needed to secure a massive investment from a notoriously skeptical board member, a hawk named Mr. Abernathy. This deal was everything. And at the head of the table sat his rival, a smarmy corporate predator named Julian, who saw the perfect opportunity to strike at Bruce through his vulnerable wife. Julian, with a wolfish grin, turned his attention to Ruth. He began asking her pointed, condescending questions about global finance, trying to expose her as the simple, uneducated woman he assumed she was. "So Ruth, what are your thoughts on the volatile derivatives market?" He sneered, the table falling silent. It was a public execution, a deliberate attempt to embarrass her and, by extension, humiliate Bruce. The room held its breath, waiting for the crash and burn. This was high-stakes drama, but the crash never came. Instead of fumbling or blushing, Ruth Ortiz met his gaze with a calm, unnerving serenity. She took a delicate sip of water, placed her glass down, and responded. Her answer wasn't just intelligent, it was brilliant. She spoke with a quiet grace and a deep, unexpected understanding of market dynamics, weaving in insights that were both nuanced and forward-thinking. She didn't just answer the question, she reframed the entire conversation with effortless poise. A stunned silence fell over the room. Julian's smirk dissolved into a mask of disbelief. Bruce was floored, completely blindsided. He sat there, speechless, watching his quiet, simple wife command the attention of some of the most powerful men in the city. To cap it all off, the skeptical Mr. Abernathy leaned forward, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "That's the most sense I've heard all night," he boomed, looking at Ruth with newfound respect. "Consider me intrigued, Bruce." The surprise was so profound it was almost comical. Bruce had brought her along as a silent prop, and instead, she had single-handedly charmed the most difficult man in the room and saved his multi-billion-dollar deal. She had revealed a hidden depth, a secret power of intellect and grace that he had never, not for 1 second, suspected she possessed. The evening had taken a shocking turn, one that left him reeling and utterly confused. Who was this woman he had married? As they left the dinner, the dynamics had subtly shifted. For the first time, a crack appeared in his arrogant facade, replaced by a flicker of grudging admiration and a whole lot of confusion. He thought he was the master of this universe, but he was beginning to realize he didn't even know the person sleeping in his bed. This was a plot twist he never saw coming, and it was a deeply unsettling, life-changing revelation for the billionaire who thought he knew it all. Still reeling from the surprise of the investor dinner, Bruce decided to test her. He couldn't reconcile the quiet woman he thought he knew with the brilliant strategist who had captivated Mr. Abernathy. So, he devised an impossible task, a trial by fire designed to expose her perceived incompetence once and for all. He put her in charge of the annual chaotic charity gala, a massive, high-profile event, and gave her an impossibly tight deadline and a reduced budget. He fully expected her to fail. The gala was his company's flagship philanthropic event, a logistical nightmare of vendors, high-profile guests, and relentless media attention. His own seasoned team struggled with it every year. By handing it to Ruth, he was setting a trap, hoping to prove that her performance at the dinner was a fluke, a lucky break. It was a cruel, calculated move, a way to reassert his dominance and put her back in the box he had created for her. It was a setup for a public humiliation. But once again, Ruth Ortiz defied all his expectations. She didn't panic or complain. Instead, she tackled the challenge with a quiet, ferocious efficiency that was nothing short of breathtaking. She wasn't just organizing, she was optimizing. She renegotiated contracts with a firmness that would make a seasoned CEO proud, streamlined the chaotic logistics with an intuitive grace, and managed the entire process flawlessly. She wasn't just meeting the challenge, she was mastering it. The night of the gala arrived, and the event was an unprecedented success. Everything was perfect, from the decor to the seamless flow of the evening. It was more elegant, more impactful, and more talked about than any gala in the company's history. But the real shock came the next day, in the form of a final budget report she left on his desk. Not only had she executed the event flawlessly, but she had also come in significantly under budget, saving the company a small fortune. This was no fluke. This was raw, undeniable talent. The report was a testament to a natural business acumen he never knew she had, a strategic mind that had been hiding in plain sight all along. The woman he had dismissed as a simpleton, a decorative piece in his life, possessed a skill set that could rival his own. The surprise was so profound it shook him to his core. He had married a business powerhouse without even realizing it. He sat in his office, staring at the numbers, the reality of the situation slowly sinking in. He had intended to test her, to expose a weakness, but instead, he had revealed a strength, a secret power he had been too arrogant to see. The rich man, poor woman dynamic he had clung to was beginning to crumble, replaced by a much more complex and intimidating picture. This plot twist was becoming a recurring theme in his marriage, and frankly, it was starting to scare him. Amid the glitz and glamour of the perfectly executed gala, Bruce found himself watching Ruth. He was looking for a flaw, for a sign of the simple woman he thought had married, but instead, he witnessed something that would stick with him forever. A young girl, the daughter of one of the caterers, had gotten lost and was crying in a quiet corridor, terrified by the overwhelming crowd and noise. Security was about to handle it, but Ruth got there first. She didn't just dismiss the child or hand her off to someone else. Instead, Bruce watched as his wife, adorned in a couture gown and millions of dollars in diamonds, knelt down on the cold marble floor. She spoke to the little girl with a gentleness that seemed completely out of place in his world of cutthroat deals. She didn't rush. She just sat there, patiently and genuinely comforting the scared child, her voice a soft murmur that cut through the distant din of the party. For what felt like an eternity, he observed this quiet, intimate scene. Ruth made the little girl laugh, wiped her tears, and held her hand, creating a small, safe bubble in the middle of the chaotic event. It was an act of pure, unadulterated kindness, performed when she thought no one was looking. There was no angle, no benefit, no transaction. It was a moment of sincere human connection, a currency so foreign to Bruce's world that it felt like a discovery from another planet. This single act began to dismantle the fortress around his heart. He was a man who understood power, wealth, and ambition. He did not understand selflessness. He saw his staff, his partners, even his family, through the lens of what they could do for him. But watching Ruth with that child, he saw a different kind of strength, a different measure of wealth. It was an emotional depth he didn't know existed, and it was more captivating than any fortune. This was a life-changing moment for the cold-hearted billionaire. The image of his elegant wife on the floor, comforting a lost child, was a shocking contradiction to everything he thought he knew about her and about the world. It was a quiet, personal plot twist, far more impactful than any business deal. The wall he had built around his emotions, brick by brick, over decades of ruthless ambition, had just developed its first significant crack. He found himself walking away before they could see him, a strange, unfamiliar feeling stirring in his chest. It was a warmth, a flicker of something he couldn't name. He was the rich man, and she was the poor woman, but in that corridor, he had never felt more impoverished, and she had never looked richer. Their strange, contracted romance was becoming something far more complicated, something that was beginning to feel dangerously real. Just as the ice around Bruce's heart began to thaw, his old suspicions came roaring back with a vengeance. While searching for a misplaced watch in Ruth's dressing room, his eyes landed on a legal document half hidden under a stack of books. His blood ran cold as he scanned the page. He saw complex legal jargon, figures, and the name of a financial institution. He didn't understand the details, but he jumped to the most cynical conclusion possible. It was his worst fear realized. His condescension reached a new, cruel peak. He stormed out of the room, waving the paper in his hand like a weapon, his face a mask of fury. He found her in the library and threw the document on the table in front of her. "I knew it," he snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "I knew this was all you ever wanted. A gold digger, that's what you are. Just tell me, how much of my fortune were you planning to siphon off with this little scheme?" He didn't give her a chance to speak, to explain. He was blinded by his own prejudice, by the narrative he had always wanted to believe about her. He accused her of plotting against him, of using their marriage as a front to steal his money. The drama was intense, his words like daggers designed to inflict the deepest possible wound. He was humiliating her in the most personal and painful way, accusing her of the one thing she had never even considered. The tragic irony was that the document had absolutely nothing to do with his fortune. It was a simple loan agreement she was co-signing, using her own modest savings to help her brother start a small business. It was an act of family loyalty, a testament to her character. But in Bruce's jaded eyes, any legal paper could only mean one thing: a conspiracy to take what was his. He couldn't conceive of a world where her life didn't revolve entirely around him and his money. She stood there, absorbing his tirade, her face pale but her eyes clear. The hurt was immense, a physical blow. After everything, the quiet support, saving his deal, running his Galathis, is what he still thought of her. He was a billionaire in wealth, but utterly bankrupt in trust. This shocking accusation revealed the true poverty of his spirit. He had built an empire, but he couldn't build a relationship based on a shred of faith. This confrontation was a new low in their complicated marriage. His cruel words hung in the air, a poison that threatened to kill the fragile sprout of emotion that had just begun to grow between them. He thought he had uncovered her secret, but all he had done was expose his own ugly soul. The real plot twist was not in the paper she held, but in the heart of the man who refused to see the truth right in front of him. Despite the ugliness of his accusation, a strange thing was happening in Bruce Joseph's life. It was getting better. A lightness had begun to permeate the cold, sterile halls of his mansion and his company. He started noticing that his household staff, who used to be tense and fearful around him, were now smiling, more relaxed. The loyalty and efficiency at his office had improved too. The entire atmosphere, once defined by fear, was now touched by a gentle, positive influence. The source, he begrudgingly admitted to himself, was Ruth. She treated everyone, from the housekeeper to his top executives, with the same quiet respect and kindness. She remembered their names, asked about their families, and performed small acts of grace that created ripples of goodwill throughout his empire. This wasn't a calculated strategy, it was just who she was. Her presence had turned his house into a home and his company into a community. This was a form of secret power he had never known, one that couldn't be bought or sold. He found himself watching her, mesmerized against his will. He'd catch himself smiling as she laughed with the cook, or feel a strange pang of pride when he heard his executives praise her insight. He was falling for her. It was an involuntary, unwelcome, and utterly terrifying process. This wasn't part of the contract, it wasn't a term in their marriage agreement. This raw, undeniable emotion was a hostile takeover of his heart, and he had no defense against it. This internal conflict was a special kind of torture for a man like Bruce. His entire life was built on control, but his feelings for Ruth were anything but controllable. He was the rich man who had everything, yet he was becoming emotionally dependent on the poor woman he thought he owned. Their scripted romance was morphing into a real love story, and it defied all logic, all reason, and every cynical belief he held dear. He was losing the war within himself. What would you do if you found yourself falling for someone you were convinced you shouldn't trust? He wanted to push her away, to retreat back to the safety of his cold, predictable world. But her pull was too strong. Her quiet strength, her shocking intelligence, and her genuine kindness had become the gravitational center of his universe. He was starting to believe in the possibility of true love, a concept he had mocked his entire life. This life-changing realization was the most disorienting experience for the billionaire CEO who always had a plan. He was caught in a trap of his own design. He had married her for convenience, but now he couldn't imagine his life without her. The drama was no longer about his fortune or his legacy, it was about the state of his own soul. He was on the verge of surrendering to this unexpected destiny, of admitting that this woman held a power over him far greater than any contract. But fate, and a jealous ghost from the past, had one more cruel trick to play. Just as Bruce was on the precipice of giving in to his feelings, his past returned with a venomous strike. A jealous ex-lover, a woman named Veronica who had never accepted being replaced, saw an opportunity for revenge. She was a creature of Bruce's old world, calculating, manipulative, and utterly ruthless. She couldn't stand seeing him soften, especially not for a woman she considered to be a nobody. So she decided to destroy the one thing that was making him happy. Veronica, using her considerable resources and connections, forged a series of documents. They were masterpieces of deception: fake emails, fabricated bank transfers, and most damningly, a cleverly altered clause that appeared to be an addendum to their marriage contract. These papers painted a clear and devastating picture. Ruth Ortiz was not just a gold digger, she was orchestrating a hostile takeover of his entire company, using the contract as her weapon. She arranged to have the forged documents accidentally discovered by Bruce, planting them in a place he was sure to find. When he saw them, his world shattered. Every fledgling hope, every budding feeling of love, was instantly incinerated by the white-hot fire of betrayal. The documents didn't just look real, they confirmed his deepest, darkest fears about Ruth, about women, about the world. It was the ultimate "I told you so" from his own cynical heart. His worst fears were seemingly confirmed. The woman he had started to love, to trust, was a viper he had welcomed into his home. The evidence was irrefutable, a perfect narrative of greed and deception. The investor dinner, the gala, her intelligentsia, all clicked into place in the most sinister way. It wasn't brilliance, it was a lone con. This plot twist felt so real, so plausible, that he didn't question it for a second. The surprise was so shocking, it bypassed all reason. His heart, which had just started to open, slammed shut, encased in a thicker, colder layer of ice than ever before. The fragile beginnings of their love story were obliterated. All he felt was a rage so pure and so absolute that it consumed him. He was a billionaire who had been played for a fool, a CEO on the verge of being dethroned by his own wife. The contract, which he now believed was her tool for revenge, became the symbol of his ultimate failure. He didn't confront her calmly. He didn't ask questions. He let the poison of the forged documents flood his system, fueling a rage that was about to erupt. The stage was set for the final, most brutal act of their drama. He was convinced he was the victim, the one who had been wronged. He had no idea he was a puppet, his strings being pulled by a jealous ex, about to destroy the only real thing in his life. The explosion was catastrophic. Bruce Joseph, consumed by a blind rage fueled by Veronica's lies, unleashed a firestorm of cruelty upon Ruth. He didn't just confront her, he orchestrated a public spectacle of humiliation. He waited until they were at another one of his sterile high society gatherings, surrounded by the same people who had mocked her before. This time, however, he wouldn't be a silent observer. He would be the ringleader of her demise. With everyone watching, he launched into a vicious tirade, his voice echoing through the stunned silence. He called her a liar, a thief, a parasite. He accused her of orchestrating the most elaborate betrayal in history. "I gave you everything," he roared, his face contorted with hate. "And you were planning to take it all." It was a final, brutal act of cruelty, designed to strip her of any dignity she had left, to utterly demolish her in front of his entire world. This wasn't a breakup, it was an execution. Then, for his grand finale, he pulled out a folded document from his jacket pocket. "This marriage is over," he spat, his eyes burning with a cold fire. "And so is your little scheme." In front of everyone, he tore what he believed was the only copy of their marriage contract into pieces, letting the shreds of paper flutter to the ground like bitter confetti. It was a symbolic act of ultimate power, his way of telling her and the world that he was back in control. He had no idea how wrong he was. The paper he had just destroyed was a clever decoy, a worthless copy he had kept in his personal safe. He was so blinded by his rage that he had forgotten the master copy, the legally binding original, was securely stored with a third-party legal firma standard procedure he himself had insisted upon. His grand gesture of power was nothing more than an empty theatrical tantrum. He had just torn up a piece of paper, not her power. In that moment, watching him, what one word would you use to describe his actions? Arrogant? Betrayed? Blind? The emotional devastation was absolute. Ruth stood there, frozen, as the man she had secretly begun to care for, the man she had saved and supported, publicly and irrevocably shattered her heart. It wasn't the accusation that hurt the most, it was the ultimate, soul-crushing lack of faith. He hadn't just doubted her, he had convicted and sentenced her without a trial. The shredded paper on the floor symbolized the ruins of their relationship. He thought he had won, that he had exposed the traitor and reclaimed his kingdom. But all he had done was incinerate the only bridge to his own redemption. He had humiliated her one last time, but in doing so, he had sentenced himself to a prison of his own making. The shock on the faces of his guests was nothing compared to the shocking emptiness that was about to consume his life. After the last shred of paper settled on the floor, there was nothing left to say. Ruth Ortiz didn't cry, she didn't scream, she didn't try to defend herself. The ultimate act of his distrust was a verdict more final than any court could deliver. With a quiet, heartbreaking dignity, she simply turned and walked away from the stunned crowd, away from the man who had just annihilated her heart and out of his life. There was no dramatic exit, just a profound and deafening silence in her wake. By the time Bruce returned to his massive, empty penthouse that night, she was gone. Her closets were empty, her personal effects vanished. It was as if she had been a ghost all along. There was no note, no forwarding address, no final word. She had disappeared as quietly as she had lived in his world, leaving behind only the echo of his cruel words and the gaping void of her absence. The silence in the mansion was no longer peaceful, it was suffocating. He had gotten what he wanted. He had expelled the traitor, torn up the contract, and secured his fortune. He was the king of his castle once more. But his victory felt hollow, the triumph ringing with the sour note of despair. He found himself wandering the halls of his gilded cage, the silence amplifying his loneliness. The life he had fought to protect suddenly felt worthless, a kingdom of ashes with no one to share it with. The woman he had called a gold digger had walked away from a multi-billion-dollar fortune without taking a single penny. The absurdity of it all began to creep into the edges of his consciousness, a small, nagging doubt in the back of his mind. If she was truly the master manipulator he believed her to be, why would she just disappear? Why would she leave empty-handed when she supposedly had him right where she wanted him? The pieces of his narrative weren't fitting together. He had built this life for himself, a fortress of wealth and power designed to keep out emotional vulnerability. And now he was its sole prisoner. He had successfully driven away the one person who had brought warmth and light into his cold existence. The loneliness was a physical ache, a constant reminder of what he had destroyed. His revenge had been swift and brutal, but the resulting emptiness was his life sentence. Heartbroken by his ultimate lack of faith, Ruth had simply vanished without a word. She left him exactly where he always claimed he wanted to be, alone, powerful, and in complete control of his sterile, loveless world. He had won the battle he had manufactured in his own mind, but in doing so, he had just lost the only war that ever truly mattered. His destiny, once so clear, was now a foggy, desolate landscape. Days turned into a week, and the nagging doubt in Bruce's mind grew into a roaring monster. The silence of his life was unbearable. Finally, driven by a desperate need for answers, he did something he hadn't done since their wedding day. He contacted the law firm that held the master documents. He needed to see the original contract, to pore over the evidence of her betrayal one more time, to justify the gaping hole in his life. The truth he found was not what he expected. The lawyer retrieved the master copy from the vault, a pristine document bound in leather. As Bruce unclosed it, his hands trembling slightly, he was floored. He read through it, his blood turning to ice. There were no secret clauses for a hostile takeover. There were no addendums. There was only the original, simple agreement, with one life-shattering, shocking exception. A clause he had never seen before, a clause so audacious it took his breath away. It was Clause 11B. It stated that, in the event of the marriage, full and unconditional control of his entire fortune, all assets, and controlling shares of his company would be transferred to a trust for which Ruth Ortiz was the sole trustee. She had held the power from day one. She could have liquidated his company, sold his homes, and left him with nothing, all with a simple legal binding signature. The secret power was hers, completely and absolutely, from the very beginning. He stumbled back, the document falling from his numb fingers. The truth hit him like a physical blow. She had never been a gold digger. She was a queen who had willingly lived as a pauper. She had possessed the power to ruin him at any moment, yet she had never used a penny of his fortune for herself. The legal document had found, the one that triggered his rage, was exactly what Shed said it wash up for her family. He had accused her of stealing from a vault she already owned. The sheer scale of his mistake was cataclysmic. His betrayal wasn't just a mistake, it was a cosmic, unforgivable error. The plot twist wasn't that she was trying to take his fortune, the plot twist was that she had always held it and had chosen to do nothing. Her power wasn't in the contract, it was in her character. The surprise was so profound, so utterly humbling, that it shattered his entire perception of reality. Devastated by the truth, Bruce finally understood. The forged documents from Veronica were a lie, a cruel manipulation he had swallowed whole because it fit his cynical worldview. But this contract, this master copy, was the truth. Ruth had never wanted his money. The immensity of her quiet dignity, her silent restraint, washed over him, and for the first time in his adult life, the arrogant billionaire Bruce Joseph broke down and wept. The tears gave way to a wave of guilt so profound it threatened to drown him. It was a suffocating, all-consuming emotion that replayed every cruel word, every dismissive glance, every moment of his arrogance on a torturous loop. He hadn't just lost a wife, he had betrayed the one person who had shown him what decency and integrity looked like. He had destroyed his one chance at true love, his one shot at redemption, all because of his own blind prejudice. Consumed by this life-changing guilt, a new, singular purpose ignited within him. He had to find her. It was no longer about apologies or explanations. It was a desperate, primal need to see her again, to prove to himself that he hadn't completely destroyed the best thing that had ever happened to him. The search for Ruth Ortiz became his obsession, the sole focus of his waking moments. He was a man on a mission, driven by a pain he had never known. He poured his vast resources into the search. He hired the best private investigators money could buy, chasing down leads that went nowhere. He flew across the country on whispers and rumors, his hope dwindling with each dead end. The irony was crushing. He was using the very fortune she had never touched to find the woman he had accused of wanting it. Every dollar he spent was a painful reminder of his monumental failure as a man. During this desperate search, he finally realized the truth that had been staring him in the face all along. Ruth was never after his money. She was after something far more valuable, something he had been incapable of giving: genuine love and respect. She hadn't wanted a billionaire, she had just wanted a husband. She wanted a partner who saw her, who valued her, who would stand up for her. It was a simple request, and he had failed in the most spectacular way possible. His journey was no longer just a physical search, it became an emotional pilgrimage. With every passing day, he shed another layer of his arrogance, his cynicism replaced by a raw, humbling vulnerability. He finally understood the classic rich man, poor woman story had been a lie. He was the one who was truly impoverished, his soul bankrupt of the things that truly mattered. He was chasing after his redemption, hoping it wasn't too late. He followed a faint trail to a small, unassuming town, a place so far removed from his world of skyscrapers and stock tickers, it might as well have been another planet. The leads were thin, but it was all he had left. He was no longer the powerful CEO on a mission, he was just a broken man, searching for his destiny, hoping against hope that he would get a second chance to fix the greatest drama of his life. He finally found her. It wasn't in a lavish apartment or a hidden estate, but in the cheerful chaos of a community shelter in that small, quiet town. He stood across the street, watching through the window, his heart pounding in his chest. There she was, Ruth Ortiz, wearing a simple apron over a pair of jeans, her hair tied back in a messy bun. She was laughing, her face illuminated with a light he hadn't seen since the day they met. She was serving meals to the homeless, her movements full of purpose and grace. In that moment, Bruce saw her for who she truly was, completely stripped of the context of his world. She wasn't the billionaire's humiliated wife or the secret holder of his fortune. She was just Ruth, a woman whose wealth had nothing to do with bank accounts or stock portfolios. Her fortune was in her compassion, her kindness, her unshakable character. She was happier here, in this humble shelter, than he had ever seen her in their soulless mansion. He watched for hours, a ghost from another life, as she moved through the shelter, offering not just food but also dignity and warmth to everyone she met. She listened to their stories, offered a comforting hand, and treated every person as an equal. This was her natural habitat. This was her true love, her passion. The secret power she held wasn't in a contract. It was in her ability to connect with people, to make the world a slightly better place just by being in it. The realization was a profound, life-changing blow. Bruce Joseph, the man who could buy and sell entire city blocks, had nothing of real value to offer her. His money, his power, his empire all seemed like a cheap imitation of wealth compared to the genuine riches of her spirit. He had offered her a gilded cage, when all she had ever wanted was the freedom to be herself. The rich man had finally understood what it meant to be poor in spirit. He saw now that her quiet life here wasn't a step down, it was an ascension. She hadn't run away from him to hide, she had run toward herself, toward a life of meaning that his world could never provide. Their destiny was not about a shared fortune, but about him finally understanding what true worth looked like. It looked exactly like the woman in the apron, serving soup with a smile that could light up the darkest room. He took a deep breath, the cold air filling his lungs, and prepared to cross the street. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have the words. All he had was a heart full of regret and a desperate hope for redemption. He was about to confront the woman he had wronged, not as a billionaire or a CEO, but as a man who had finally, painfully, understood the meaning of true love. Just as Bruce was about to begin his quest for personal redemption, his corporate world was imploding. His old rival, Julian, the same man who had tried to humiliate Ruth at the investor dinner, had seen an opening. Believing Bruce was distracted and weakened by his wife's disappearance, Julian orchestrated a brilliant and ruthless maneuver. He called an emergency board meeting, convinced he had secured enough proxy votes for a hostile takeover. The company Bruce's father had built was about to be stolen from him. The boardroom was a war zone. Julian presented his case with smug confidence, laying out Bruce's perceived failures. The mood was grim, the numbers were on Julian's side. Bruce fought back, but he was exhausted, his heart not fully in it. He was about to lose everything he had ever worked for. It seemed his final humiliation was at hand. The drama was reaching its peak as the final vote was about to be called, a vote that would seal his corporate demise. And then, the doors to the boardroom swung open. A collective gasp went through the room. Standing there, radiating a calm and unshakable confidence, was Ruth Ortiz. She wasn't dressed as the simple volunteer from the shelter. She was wearing a razor-sharp power suit, her presence commanding immediate and total attention. She walked calmly to the head of the table, her lawyers flanking her, and placed a single file in front of the chairman. "There seems to be a misunderstanding about the ownership structure of this company," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with absolute authority. She calmly invoked Clause 11B of the marriage contract, the one giving her sole control of the trust that held the majority share of the company. With a few simple, devastating sentences, she revealed the shocking truth to the entire board. She was, and had been from the start, the majority shareholder. The plot twist was so audacious, so utterly unthinkable, that the room was plunged into a stunned, deafening silence. Julian's face went from triumph to ashen horror. He had tried to wrestle control from a king, only to find out he had been playing checkers with a queen who owned the entire board. Ruth had used her secret power not for personal gain or revenge on Bruce, but to save the legacy he was about to lose. It was the ultimate power move, executed with grace and precision. With her position established, she cast the deciding vote, instantly killing the takeover bid and shattering Julian's ambitions. She had saved the company. The surprise was electrifying. She wasn't there for revenge against Bruce, she was there to protect the empire. She looked across the table at her estranged husband, her expression unreadable, leaving him and everyone else wondering what her next move would be in this incredible love story. In front of the entire board, in the wake of her stunning victory, the room held its breath, waiting for her next move. Would she take over as CEO? Would she oust Bruce? Instead, she simply nodded to the chairman, her work done. But as she turned to leave, Bruce Joseph did something no one in that room could have ever predicted. The arrogant, untouchable billionaire moved from behind the table, walked towards her, and fell to his knees. It wasn't a gesture of defeat, but one of pure, unadulterated adoration. The king was kneeling before his queen, not because she had conquered his kingdom, but because she had saved it, and in doing so, had saved him. All the arrogance was gone, stripped away, replaced by a raw, humbling vulnerability. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a love and respect that was now, finally, unconditional. This was his true and final redemption. "In the lucky one, Ruth," he said, his voice thick with emotion, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I was always the lucky one. Marrying you was the greatest thing that ever happened to me, and I was too blind and too stupid to see it." He wasn't begging for his company, he was begging for her. "Please," he whispered, "give me a chance to earn a real marriage. A real love story. With you." A single tear traced a path down Ruth's cheek, but she was smiling. It was a smile of forgiveness, of hope, of a destiny finally fulfilled. This was the moment she had been waiting for, not the power or the fortune, but the genuine transformation of the man she had, against all odds, come to love. Her kindness, her quiet strength, had been her greatest asset all along, a power far greater than any contract. If you believe in the power of second chances, hit that like button as a sign of respect for their journey. She reached down and took his hand, pulling him to his feet. In front of everyone, she accepted. Their marriage, once a cold business contract, was now reborn as a partnership built on mutual respect, admiration, and a hard-won true love. The journey had been filled with drama, humiliation, and shocking twists, but it had led them here, to a life-changing, authentic connection. It was the ultimate plot twist. The billionaire had to lose everything to finally gain the one thing that mattered. Their story became a legend in the business world, a testament to the fact that the greatest fortunes aren't measured in dollars, but in character. Ruth Ortiz never had to use her power in a hostile way. She won by simply being who she was. And Bruce Joseph learned that being married to her was indeed a stroke of luck, but not for the reasons he once thought. Her heart was the greatest fortune he would ever possess. What an incredible journey! The story of Bruce and Ruth is a powerful reminder that a person's true fortune is never measured by what's in their bank account, but by the richness of their character. It proves that sometimes the greatest power isn't the one that shouts the loudest, but the one that has the strength and integrity to wait. If you also believe that kindness is a superpower, and that true strength is often found in quiet dignity, then you've found your place here. Subscribe to our channel and join a community that celebrates stories where the heart, not the wallet, wins in the end. Now for the trifecta of engagement. Hit the like button as a way to cast your vote for true love and redemption. In the comments below, answer this one question. What was the exact moment you believe Bruce Joseph truly began his journey to redemption? And finally, share this story with one person who needs to be reminded of their own inner power. And while you wait for what's next, know that our channel is a treasure chest of emotional stories just like this one. We invite you to explore our past videos and discover other unforgettable journeys that will move and inspire you. To ensure you don't miss a single one of the incredible stories we have yet to tell, make sure you ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss the emotional roller coaster that's coming next, and we can't wait to see you there.